Today, we learn how to replace the concept of bosses with self-management.
This is the Value Creators Podcast, your source for a new kind of business education, escaping from business administration mode and entering dynamic entrepreneurship mode. We're guided by entrepreneurial economics, which is the source of all growth and positive change for businesses of all sizes in all markets. We talk to experienced experts in value creation so that there's business learning for you in every episode.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. The entire concept of management in business is disastrously misplaced in the current digital age. You know, the layered hierarchy where your boss has a boss, has a boss who has a boss who reports to the C-suite, which is where, last year, they did planning and budgeting and resource allocation that you have to try and implement this year, even though the market has changed at tremendous speed. Management is good for maintenance mode, but it's not good for innovation and adaptation. Moreover, management's bad for people. It limits creativity, it curtails freedom, and it's essentially coercive, some people telling other people what to do. Fortunately, this old management paradigm is fading away. It's being replaced by something new. We call it self-management. And today, we have as a guest Doug Kirkpatrick, who is the foremost expert and proponent of self-managed organizations in the world. He was part of the founding team at the Morningstar Company, the global leader in self-management. Morningstar self-managed its way from an empty patch of dirt to a billion-dollar corporation dominating its chosen category. Doug is now an advisor at D'Artagnan Advisors, helping other companies to build vibrant, free, thriving, self-managing organizations. Doug, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Pleasure to be here with you today.
Well, the pleasure is ours, and we're going to learn from you. We're going to learn some very interesting things about better ways of thinking and acting in managing businesses. And in your most recent book, The No Limits Enterprise, you give us an entirely new management paradigm to think about, and it's self-management. So there are enormous implications of that. We'll explore the concept and what it means. But I know that you describe the beginning of thinking about self-management with principles. So tell us your story, but we would really like to understand the principles behind self-management.
Okay. Well, the story began in 1990. I joined the core team of a little company here in Northern California with an entrepreneur named Chris Roofer. And his vision was to start a high-tech, high-volume food processing company. And I was the financial controller. We had about 24 of us in all, and most were technicians and mechanics and electricians. I was the admin, and we were working out of a tiny little farmhouse here in Northern California on a dirty, dusty canal bank, and we were building a large, high-tech, high-volume factory to process tomatoes. And the company was called Morningstar. And one day in March of 1990, our founder came into the farmhouse and asked us if we'd be willing to have a meeting and talk about how to organize. And we said, sure. So we met at night in a double-wide construction trailer out on the job site. We sat around in a circle on folding chairs, and our founder handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. And essentially, they boiled down to two core principles. The first was that human beings should not use force or coercion against other human beings. And if you think about that principle, it's the foundation of all law everywhere in the world, especially criminal law. Every law against assault, battery, theft, burglary, kidnapping, murder, all the rest is based on that principle, non-use of force. The second principle was that people should keep the commitments they make to each other. And if you think about that, it's also foundational to law, because contract law, for example, would mean nothing if parties didn't honor their commitments to each other. And so we discussed and debated and had a dialogue about these two core principles for a couple hours. At the end of the evening, our core team just looked around the circle at each other and realized we had no objections to these principles. They were self-evident principles. And so when we filed out of the trailer, we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. And that was the beginning of self-management in our organization. And so this was March of 1990, had a lot of work to do. We had thousands of acres of tomatoes, tens of thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground up and down the state of California. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory and drive the trucks. We had vital equipment arrive in on ocean cargo freighters out in the Atlantic Ocean waiting to go through the Panama Canal. And we had hundreds of contractors on the job site 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constructing and fabricating and pulling wire and all the rest. Finally, on July 16th of 1990, we turned on the factory, and that summer we produced 90 million pounds or 45 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market and changed the cost structure of our entire industry virtually overnight. And we did it without a single human boss. No bosses, no managers of others, no supervisors, no vice presidents, no titles, no command authority of any kind. And so people found that interesting, and customers liked the product, so we went on to grow. We expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers and remote warehouses across North America, and toward the supply in terms of farming and harvesting and transplanting and trucking. We built another factory and then another factory, and in the course of that growth, Morningstar became the largest tomato processor in the world. Now a billion-dollar company, 4,500 or so employees, the largest tomato processor in the world, and it's never deviated from its two core principles: don't use force and keep commitments. That's the essence of the story.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful story, and thanks for telling it, Doug. So one of the thoughts that comes to mind immediately is that everything that we've been told about business management has an element of coercion in it. It's an authority hierarchy. It's people telling other people what to do in order to coordinate and get projects completed and so on. So have we totally left behind all principles of management that we learn in business school, in business administration, and the history of American business?
Well, it depends on how you look at it, Hunter. So if you look at Morningstar, Morningstar has definitely left behind the principles that are taught in most business schools. If you go back in history, however, most people were self-managed. Most people that were craftsmen and tradesmen prior to the industrial age were self-managed. They had to figure out how to create value for other people in their communities. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive. And so we're, in a sense, recapturing at Morningstar the original intent of business, which is to create value for other human beings and do it in a way that doesn't rely on the coercion and the force that was employed in the growth of the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of that started in 1841 with a train wreck on the Western Railway where trains collided, killing people. The Western Railway hired George Whistler, a civil engineer, to study the matter, and he came out with the world's first industrial org chart: lines of command, chains of authority, command authority, and all the rest, silos, and bureaucracy. And that's the way organizations spread and grew throughout the entire industrial age. And unfortunately, that's the way most organizations are still organized today. We think that with the internet, with instant communication, information moving at light speed, now we have blockchain, artificial intelligence, and all the other technologies of the modern age. We think we can actually transcend traditional industrial command and control organization.
So you go back in history. The train wreck story is new to me, but I do know about Frederick W. Taylor, who instituted what they called scientific management. And when I think of that, I think of my model is always Standard Oil with John D. Rockefeller. It got so big and so complex and such wide geography that he couldn't manage it entrepreneurially. He had to put in the scientific bureaucratic system. So was he just starting with wrong first principles, or has the world changed and enabled us to rethink it?
Yeah, great question, Hunter. I think the world changed. I actually don't fault the people who invoked org charts and silos and lines of communication, because at the time, how else were we supposed to develop continent-wide systems of transportation and communication and all the other features of modern technology? Uh, Information in the 1840s moved at the speed of Morse code. There
Mm-hmm.
was no other way to do it, and so we had characters moving one character at a time through copper wire, and that's not the world we live in today. So the world has changed radically and drastically, and at Morningstar, we're experimenting with the idea that organizational design can change as well with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I love that thought that that's the new frontier of innovation is organizational design. Well, let's see if we can build up the picture from the bottom then, Doug. So uh, we've got those two principles. We now have, let's start with two individuals. They put into practice their commitments. I think you have an operating system for that, right? That there's a way of doing that that's very specific and builds up from the bottom. Tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks. It's based on the idea of individuals making commitments to each other. And the way we institute that at Morningstar is through a tool called the Colleague Letter of Understanding. Morningstar actually operated for 6 years without that tool. It wasn't until it essentially doubled in size by building its second factory that we realized that we needed a coordination mechanism that was more robust and more explicit than individuals just shaking hands and agreeing to work together. And so in 2006, we developed the Colleague Letter of Understanding. Essentially, it laid out the who, what, why, when, where, and how of work. And so individuals forged these letters of understanding with each other. They were individual contracts, as sets for performance, describing their personal commercial missions, why they were there, what did excellence look like in their role, how did what they do support the mission, vision, values, and principles of the enterprise. And then it laid out the list of services they agreed to perform, and in some cases, the scope and quantum of their decision-making authority, the colleagues with whom they needed to be connected, what were their resource requirements, what were their goals, how did they handle conflict, and various other aspects of the work. And so individuals contracted with between 7 and 12, generally speaking, the people with whom they worked most closely, made representations about these aspects of their work, and these became, in essence, enforceable contracts, the colleague letters of understanding. And the network of those colleague letters of understanding essentially formed the entire organizational structure of the enterprise.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating picture. The network of contract. It's hard to visualize, but I know you have a visualization of that. We'll put a link in the show notes. But so instead of an organizational design, you have a network that builds itself. Is that a good way to think about it? Through all of these commitments and these shared CLOUs, the colleague letters of understanding. That's the network.
That is the network, and it's a very resilient and strong network and robust. Very much, when depicted visually, it resembles a spider web. As we know, spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel by weight, so it's extremely tough and resilient. And if individuals in that network decide to leave, it literally doesn't matter, because remaining people in the network quickly reallocate roles and responsibilities to compensate for whatever changes occur in the network. And essentially, if you made a time-lapse movie of this network, it would be in constant motion as individuals negotiate and renegotiate those roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, so you get to a unity of some kind, right? Well, not just some kind, a great kind. You've got Morningstar, the unity, the whole company, the whole, and it's made up of all of these individual connections and contracts. I'm trying to build a picture of you painted it very well, of that big construction site with all the contractors and trucks and pipelines and wires. Does it feel like it's a unity?
Well, it's very much a unity, I believe, because individuals that work at Morningstar agree to subscribe to the mission, the vision, the values, and the principles of the enterprise as a condition of coming aboard. And then they agree to support those in the course and scope of their employment. And so it creates a really strong culture, as Edgar Schein would describe, of
Hmm.
very strong tacit mutual understandings that guide behavior. And so people do come on board, and often they stay for a very long time, and many stay for their entire careers. Seasonal colleagues often come back to work year after year for 3 months after being laid off for 9 months. Essentially, some have come back 30 years in a row because they love the culture.
We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course. For entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry, our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. Go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link. Yeah, so we tend to think about companies as unities because they have a CEO, they have a board of directors, they're a singular brand, they have a stock price. Your picture is a lot different. It's individuals subscribing to, you say, networking into these values and principles. It's a really nice concept. One of the elements that you do away with, that you eliminate, is bureaucracy. As I understand it, I know I know you think very badly about bureaucracy. So do I. Are you actually able to say there's no bureaucracy in a self-managed corporation like the Morningstar Company?
No, I don't think I'd quite make that claim, Hunter. I think I would call it minimum viable bureaucracy. What's the
Okay.
least amount of bureaucracy with which one can get away? The legal environment, the regulatory environment imposes certain requirements that require certain aspects of bureaucracy. And so Morningstar is very much interested in complying with all those sorts of requirements and in fact, going beyond. So there's no escaping some level of bureaucracy. The key is how much can you get away with abolishing, and that's always been the goal.
So when you describe bureaucracy that way, there are some rules, like compliance rules and safety rules, and somebody has to impose them, communicate them, make sure that we're adhering to them. How
All
does
of the above.
bureaucracy?
Yeah, all of
Yeah.
the above. And also that invokes one of the key principles of Morningstar, which is that everyone is responsible for everything that comes into one's scope of awareness. So if I am, for example, an accounts payable clerk, and I happen to notice a forklift driver driving in an unsafe manner, I then own that situation. I then have to deal with it directly or by reporting it to someone who can deal with it. So this concept of total responsibility is really one of the key pillars as well of responsible self-management.
Yeah, fascinating. So the other element of bureaucracy is it tends to creep. It tends to get bigger and bigger. I've been looking at higher education recently as an example of that, where the number of administrators grows faster than the number of professors and the number of students, because administration always tends to add to its power, its number of people, its scope. And that was the old Peter principle. It was, a lot of people have looked at that. How do you stop it from creeping? So you've got to have some. How do you stop it from creeping?
That's a good question, Hunter. I'm not sure there's an active, explicit effort to stop bureaucracy from creeping. I would say it's more a case of bureaucracy doesn't seem to creep because people are inoculated against it and try to avoid it as much as possible. So when you have that mindset built into the culture, it's really kind of like rejecting those tendencies at every level on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I like that image. It's a disease, and we have to
Right. Right.
have to eradicate it. Um, so another way people think about corporations and the traditional structures is there's always an element of top down. Um, have you eliminated that completely? So you said there's no coercion. Is there any top down influence or imposition or rule making? Does top down exist?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I would say it doesn't exist in the sense there is no top. So if you look at the spiderweb network visualization or the time-lapse movie of the network, there's no up or down, there's no top or bottom, there's no east or west. It's a three-dimensional network of individuals who are interconnected by virtue of their respective roles and responsibilities and their colleague letters of understanding. So imposing is not allowed. The idea of not using force means that no one has any authority to walk up to another person and tell them to stop doing X and start doing Y. Everything is accomplished through request and response. So it's okay to ask somebody to do something, and people have the right to say no, or to renegotiate or to negotiate the terms and conditions under which they will do something. But imposing and issuing commands and orders is explicitly not allowed, even on the part of the owner of the company. And so that's why this works. It's modeled by everyone in the organization, regardless of the scope and quantum of their commercial responsibilities. So there are colleagues with a very vast, broad scope of commercial responsibility. They have no more authority to issue commands than someone who's sorting tomatoes. And that is really why this governance, self-management system works. It's modeled continuously throughout the organization.
Yeah, so my mindset then, if I'm in the organization, is somehow I'm trying to struggle for the words, but it's holistic. I'm thinking about the whole, or it's collectivist. We're all together. Do you have a word for it? Do you have a mindset for it?
Well, it's very much about the individual. Only
Yeah.
individual human beings are real. Only individual human beings can take actions, and individual human beings can make decisions. So teams are concepts. Business units are concepts. Companies are concepts. Societies are concepts. Concepts can influence individual behavior. It can guide individual behavior and steer it, but only individuals are real. So Morningstar is very much cognizant of that fact, and that's why it honors the voice and the value of each individual human being in the enterprise.
That's lovely. And it brings to mind another word that we struggle with, we talk about a lot, which is leadership. So it's taught in business schools as the great individual who has the great vision and the great strategy and inspires others to follow in her or his footsteps. How do you think about leadership in the Morningstar company or in the self-managed corporation?
Thank you for that question. So, Morningstar colleagues very much embrace the idea of free will. Um, People have free will. We know this because, for example, you and I agreed to be on this podcast this morning, and we could have agreed to do something else instead. But we freely chose to be here. And so free will is important. And if you believe in free will, then it's no one's job to motivate any other person. It's no one's job to inspire any person. The job of the leader is to understand a vision of some desired future state into which they can invite, not force or coerce, but invite other people to follow on a journey toward. And so that's the job of the leader. Um, Leadership is available to everyone and anyone at Morningstar. Um, Leadership is natural leadership at Morningstar. What that means is that the mantle of leadership is earned, not bestowed, but earned through trust,
Mhm.
respect, and communication. And that takes time and effort and engaging with individuals on a relational level, on a human level, earning their trust and respect. And leadership is available to every single person in the enterprise. Everybody can be a leader, just like everyone is already a manager. And so leadership appears spontaneously, sometimes from unexpected sources, and that's a beautiful thing, and it's a
Mhm.
welcome thing, and it's something that is serendipitous in many cases and extremely high in value creation. We had a mechanic a few years ago. He kind of identified a better way of handling materials, handling chemicals, and so he sketched out some simple engineering diagrams, shared them with colleagues, found some budget, implemented a little capital project that ended up saving a lot of money. And so those opportunities are available to every single person in the enterprise at all times. And that's one of the secrets of success for Morningstar.
Well, I was going to ask you how innovation happens, but I think you've described it, but perhaps you can expand on that. So innovation requires somebody to kind of step out of the mainstream. I've got a better idea. I want to change. I imagine a different future. How so that can be initiated by an individual, but maybe tell us more about how it works. How do I choose between all the different possible innovation ideas that are simmering up from the bottom?
So the example I gave is a good example of how innovation occurs. Those possibilities are always available. And then, so how do you sort between different ideas that come to the table? And generally speaking, anything that has a positive return and can be financed budgetarily is financed because people come up with all kinds of great ideas for how to expand and go into new lines of business and develop new products and services. So those things are kind of spread out on a table and analyzed and ranked and rated and if something makes sense, generally speaking, Morningstar pursues it. So that's a very, very important aspect of kind of continuous development and innovation that really never stops. It's always
Yeah.
ongoing.
Is there a calculation there, Doug? A discounted cash flow or return on future invested capital? Do you try to quantify it as well
Oh,
as
sure. Yeah,
budget?
all of the above. Yeah, absolutely. We always try to quantify and understand what the expected rates of return are and do risk benefit analysis and kind of figure out exactly what the numbers are so that they can then those innovations can be ranked and prioritized.
So that brings us to another question about allocation of resources. One of the most bureaucratic activities in the traditional management paradigm is budgeting. I allocate your budget from the top and it's fixed and you got to hit your numbers every month and so on. Tell us about budgeting in the Morningstar company.
Well, budgeting is very unique in that Morningstar has always used what's called a 24-month or maybe sometimes a 5-year cash flow model. And that's simply looking at history. And Morningstar has all the history going back to day one. And it's an idea of laying out costs and revenues by month and then projecting into the future in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years into the future. And it's just a method of knowing solidly what the history is and then being able to play what if games with the future. And so it's a dynamic cash flow budget model that looks into the future. It doesn't really lay down, here's the allocation by department, by cost category for every department or business unit or individual, and then look at, well, what was the deviance this month? And then, people have to explain the deviance. People do have to explain the numbers for which they are accountable pursuant to their colleague letter of understanding. But it's a dynamic cash flow model. It's very much future oriented and very much about just creating the ability to play what if games by changing assumptions and having some kind of idea about what the possibilities are for the future. That's very much what it's about.
So there are a number of, if you go into the literature and you read about self-management or new ways of managing companies, a lot of the literature tends to be negative. It tends to talk about the errors that were made and the failures. Zappos is a famous one. Valve, the gaming company, is another one that maybe had to rethink. But you know about those. What would you tell us about the broader application of what the Morningstar company does? Is self-management a movement? Is it something we should all be investigating?
I think it's something that should be watched carefully, and where it makes sense, it should be studied and possibly emulated because the principles that I described earlier are really the two most important principles of human interaction. They are to human beings what gravity is to physics. And how do we know that? Well, if you imagine a world where everyone abandoned the use of force, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And of course, we understand that's not reality and that's not realistic, but that's not the point. The point is the closer we approach that ideal, very idealistic state in an organization, the more space we open up in that organization for human happiness, which is the starting point of the raison d'etre for Morningstar, trying to unlock human happiness, harmony, transparency, teamwork, great leadership, and better human lives. If you imagine a world where every single person always kept their promises, always did what they said they were going to do, that would be an amazing world in which to live. And of course, we know we don't live in that world, but again, that's not the point. The point is the closer we can approach that ideal state in an organization, the more space we open up for human happiness and high performance and teamwork and just great human feelings. So that is really the rationale for it. And we know that keeping commitments, for example, has quantifiable, measurable economic, financial value. And that logic applies to businesses as well as to individual human contributors. And so it's really about getting down to the fundamental principles of human life and human interaction and trying to make those explicit in an organizational context. And Morningstar may be the first and maybe the only company that's really grounded itself on those bedrock principles in a very idealistic way, and yet has managed to make them work for 35 years. And so I think that's why people find it somewhat interesting.
Yeah, not just interesting, but compelling. That takes me to, I know you think about this a lot, the whole concept of the moral case for business. You've described that for the Morningstar company, very much for the participants, the people who are members of the Morningstar company. What about the outside world, the suppliers, and most importantly, the customers? Has self-management made a big difference in customer relationships? Do customers start to look at you and say, boy, I can adopt some of these principles? How has that effect taken place?
Well, that's a good question, Hunter. I would say that customers, for the most part, don't care. Customers want good quality at a good price. That's pretty much what customers care about. Now, if they read about Morningstar or hear about Morningstar's organizational design, they may have an academic interest or a curiosity. But I would say it probably doesn't do a lot in terms of creating a desire to adopt or embrace these principles. Um, who knows? We'll have to see how influence spreads over time and around the world. There are other food companies who have adopted these principles based on the Morningstar example. A local convenience store chain a couple of years ago, Freshville, explicitly adopted Morningstar's approach to organizational self-management, and they've been quite successful. And if you were to talk to a young person behind the counter at a Freshville store and ask them who their boss was, they would say, "I'm the boss." And so influence can spread in unexpected ways and unpredictable ways. But Morningstar customers per se, I don't think have necessarily been influenced by self-management.
What about the world? So we worry a lot about young people, especially, and the way that business is viewed as cold and harsh and extractive, and people are falling out of love with business as a vehicle for improving human lives a little bit. Can we help young people understand some of these better qualities of business through the mode of self-management? You have hope there?
That's my hope, Hunter. That's my dearest hope. And that's why I speak and write and talk about self-management. And we look at the rising generation, Generation Z, and the young people coming up behind them, and they're looking for better ways of working. And to the degree we can share the Morningstar story and other similar stories with them, and like the story of Freshville, and create environments that are enthusing, that elevate human happiness, then we have hope for the future. And I think that's why I do what I do.
Well, good. Well, thank you for doing that, Doug. And I always try to relate it to concepts of autonomy and freedom and letting people be the best contributor they can possibly be. I know you think about the contribution mindset, and getting that mindset instilled into young people, into everybody, could be the way that we think better about business.
I think so, and helping people understand that when they can contribute value to other people, more value comes to them, and helping people see that is critical.
Good. Well, thank you, Doug. We'll link to several of your books. The latest one is the No Limits Organization, I think, or Enterprise, is it? I don't have my notes in front of me. Enterprise. Yep. Thank you. Yep. Is there a website for people to go to find out more about your mission?
I would say just go to dougkirkpatrick.com.
Good. And we'll try and find a link to that YouTube presentation I know you made about the spider web, the three-dimensional dynamic network of the Morningstar. That's really helpful. It's a really helpful visual.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Doug, thank you. We really appreciate being here today, and we hope the movement continues.
Thanks very much, Hunter. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode. And check hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.